street trees and lawn. And what if this vision is putting forest back in the lawn part and salt marsh back in the part that's south of the flood line. And here's its ecological performance. Or Hudson Yards, which is a major, multi-billion-dollar development on the west side of Manhattan. And these are the historic wetlands of that site. These are the current wetlands or current ecosystems of that site. And here's a vision that tries to combine those, that tries to build in some climate resilience and flood resilience at the same time, having density and apartment buildings and office buildings. And here's the performance of that. So the idea is to try and provide a tool that's informed by history, that's informed by science, by sustainability science, so we can think of the city as habitats for people. Habitats that provide food and water and shelter and reproductive resources, places to grow our families, but also a sense of meaning. If you read into the history of cities, you'll see they're all about meaning and imagination. All the great inventions of the world, religion, military, law, justice, conservation even, all come from cities. They're urban inventions. We come to cities to make meaning for ourselves. And so much so the city has been focused on that sometimes we've forgotten about these other things. But I think what's exciting is our generation now is actually rediscovering meaning in terms of food and water and shelter and how we raise our kids. And therefore giving us a new platform for reimagining the cities that we live in such a way that they work with the environment instead of against the environment, in such a way that they can perhaps provide sustainability over the long term. And that we'll only achieve visions like this if we can work all of us together to share our best ideas and then work together to create the future. Thank you very much. So I think Dr. Anderson wanted to take some questions or open up the floor to questions. Maybe we can bring up the lights.
We have time for questions.
Yeah. Comments and criticisms are also desired. Yeah, please.
The historical military maps that you were using,
Yeah.
you said that they showed shading for elevation rather than lines and such. How were you able to interpret those to see just how much elevation it indicated?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So she was saying that, like, the British headquarters map has hatchers for elevation, doesn't show you the actual elevations. And that's exactly right. That almost derailed the entire project. But there were a couple of ways around it, as it turns out. One was to go to places that haven't changed elevation in 400 years. And that turns out to be those big glacial outcrops in the parks, right? Like Empire Rock in Central Park. So I had a whole big group of students, just like you, walking around with altimeters and GPSs in Central Park and making measurements of elevation. We stood on every big rock on Manhattan Island to get an elevation for it. It also turns out that there's a series of maps that were made after the Commissioner's Plan of 1811 was adopted for New York City. That's the plan that showed the road grid of New York. To actually survey in the road grid, to actually say where 5th Avenue and 42nd Street would cross. So there was somebody, a man named John Randall, who did those surveys. He and his teams, they would place these marble markers. And when they did that, they measured elevations. So we found the Randall farm maps, which are now kind of famous. They're in the Manhattan Borough Topographic Office. The farm maps showed elevations, and then we found his notebooks in the New York Historical Society. So we transcribed all of his elevation observations, and eventually got over 7,000 observations of elevation that we can lay on the British headquarters map and then build a digital elevation model. Yes, please.
I have a couple of questions. One of them has to do with uncertainty in the construction of these maps. I've actually looked into this, doing this, the evidence that's out there for Long Island ecosystems. And it seems like those boundaries that people have worked out thus far are very fuzzy. It sounds from what you said like the process is mainly of coming up with these 55 ecosystems on Manhattan is mainly based on the topography and the geology and not on soil sampling or that. Is sort of projecting from that. And it seems like
Also
there was a lot of uncertainty moving from there to the actual images. I'm wondering actually how speculative and perhaps even fictional a lot of this recreation is. And my second question has to do with what it seems like are kind of the mixed messages of your project. I hear you sort of in your talk and so on, talking about your love of the city and so on, but when and I appreciate having that Mannahatta book on my coffee table, but when I look through that, it's inviting me to imagine this place as though there were no city at all. And it seems like the message there is the impossibility of having a city that is friendly to or coexisting alongside nature. And so I appreciate all of this sort of next step, but this gets to me to another point, is that I saw the two images side by side of the natural Manhattan and the city, and then what's next, and it struck me that if you put those two together and sort of interwove them, that you have a place that looks a lot like what 20th century Long Island has become, with lots of buildings, but also lots of trees and greenery. And so, I understand that's not where you're pointing to, but I just wanted to invite your comments on that.
Yeah, sure. So that's three things, right?
Yeah.
I'll see if I can get them all.
Okay.
So the first one is, how much is it fictional and how much do we know what we know? And in that sense, it's like a lot of history, the study of history, which is you have pieces of information and you put them together. And I can't tell, I don't have a time machine. I can't go back to Mannahatta and tell you, oh yeah, that was a red oak, and oh yeah, that was a chestnut. Oh shoot, that beach should have been right over there, not over here. I can't do that. All I can do is be transparent about my source material and transparent about my methods. And that's part of what the big book's about, right? There's 120 pages of notes there that describe the methods. And then we've revealed them through the website, and we've done the best we can to be as transparent as possible. But I'd welcome anybody to try and do a better job. And we tried to leave enough breadcrumbs so that somebody could do a better job in the future if they found something else. For over 100 years, that British headquarters map was not known. Nobody knew about it. And so, there's like the Veely water map, which is a famous one they use in the city a lot to figure out where the old streams were. Made in 1865, but without the British headquarters map, and it was the best they had. And then I found something better, and so we can do Veely one better. That's all I can say about that. And I'll say that's actually true for science as well. Science is this process of making observations, constructing a theory, and then testing that theory. And sometimes we find out our theory was wrong, and then we change, we have a paradigm shift. So I think it's in that same mode. So that was one, maybe. So two is about the the nature versus city kind of thing. And I think when I look at that split screen image, I don't see them against each other. I see the same place at two different time points. And that's, at one level, that's all I'm talking about. It was this, or something like this, if you like. It is this, or something like this. It's going to be something else in the future. What do we want it to be? I don't prejudge which one is better or worse. And the reason I talk about my love of the city is because it's genuine in the sense that I want a place for us all to live, right? And I think there's many reasons to think we're on a trajectory that's not going to provide that for future generations, right? We have a whole cultural way of interacting with our environment that kicks the can down the road, pushes problems down the road, whether we're talking about climate change or soil pollution or air pollution or habitat destruction, or the long list of the concerns that conservation biologists have, which I share. But whereas I think a lot of conservation biologists come from a mode of, look, it was great, now it's terrible, what are you going to do about it? Kind of thing, like in your face. I don't think that's a very productive conversation. Much more productive is to say, it was this, it is this, they both have certain performance characteristics, right? They work in certain ways. Is that the way we want it to work? And if it's not, how do we modify it to make it work? And that's where 2409 lives. That's where Terra Nova lives. Is ideas about how do we make it work better. In that long American tradition of can do. Yes, we can do it. If I show you how the forests work and I show you how the buildings work, can you design buildings that work as well as a forest? That's the challenge. And I think it's possible. I think it's possible. And now I'm coming to the third point. Is that good? Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question about the species, the 1,000 species you think lived in?
Yeah.
How did you come up with that one?
Yeah, so,
And what were they? Anything good?
all kinds of great things. Yeah, well, first thing I should say is we didn't do the invertebrates. We just did the plants and the vertebrate animals. So if we'd done the invertebrates, there would have been tens of thousands of species, right?
That's okay.
So the way we did that is by looking at records in the past. So the idea, the sort of initial idea is if a species has been observed in the city, then there was a probability that it was there before. And so we made a list. We found lists of plants and animals from the city, and we combined them together. There's a lot of nomenclature change over time. Scientific names change over time. So there's a big piece of work there. Turns out, the city, because it's been a city for so long, has attracted people of all kinds for so long time. Some of those people are scientists. Often they're scientists that have their work way away from the city, but then they do science in the city because they can't help themselves. So, the first detailed botanical survey of Manhattan Islands by John Torrey in 1817, and he's the Torrey Botanical Society, a very important early American botanist. And his first book is about the plants and animals within 25 miles of New York City. So, or the plants within 25 miles of New York City. So we combined all that stuff. We threw out the things that are range shifts or introductions. We added back anything that's gone extinct, which is actually relatively few. Things that have gone globally extinct. And then we ranked them by probability. Likely, probable, possible, remotely likely. And that's what we did. So the 1,001 is the 1,001 likely species. There's about 1,800 that are possible. And yeah, in terms of things, they're all cool. Wolves, there were wolves on Manhattan until 1721. The British had to organize a hunt to get rid of the last wolves in Inwood Park, or up in Inwood in northern Manhattan. The Dutch shot a black bear on Maiden Lane in 1630. It wasn't a lane there, it was this creek, but they shot a black bear. Teddy Roosevelt writes about the Dutch treeing a mountain lion on the Upper East Side in the 1680s. There's still whales in the harbor, occasionally, porpoises, seals, of course, river otters, bobcats, elk and deer. Yeah, lots of white-tailed deer.
Any moose?
Probably not moose, probably not bison. Although bison were all the way to New Jersey once upon a time. Some people think.
They still live there, don't they? No,
There's bison in the Bronx now, but that's beside the point. Yeah. So it was an amazing place. I've sometimes said, and you might tell me this is wild extrapolation, but imagine America had been settled from the west to east. And by the time we got east, we're like, maybe we should make a national park. Maybe we should reserve some piece of nature. We might have decided to reserve Manhattan Island, right? And it would have been like the best national park in the country, easily on the East Coast. And people would have come from all over the world to see the wildlife of Manhattan. Didn't happen that way. Yeah?
So, humans culturally just are going to be living in cities more and more. I think in America, there's a general move towards cities.
There's a worldwide move, yeah.
A worldwide, yeah. I wanted to ask, what do you think this kind of project, what kind of impact are you hoping to have in terms of how cities are designed in the future, even the cities that exist today? Like, what are you hoping to change, I guess, in the way people see the places where they live?
Well, I think I'm hoping people see every place as having the potential for nature, and for them having a role in the kind of nature that expresses itself there. And that they make choices that are affirmative of nature and affirmative of their lives, instead of destructive of those things. That's, in the largest sense, that's the goal. That's the goal. But I can't do that on my own, obviously. One of the things we all struggle with in our careers is, no matter how much education and training we get or how lofty a position is, there's always boundaries on your time and energy and influence. So this project, it appealed to me personally, but it also appealed to me in the sense that New York City is sort of this icon of cities all over the world. And, like the song says, if you can do it in New York, you can do it anywhere, right? So what I'm trying to do now is do a set of activities that I hope inspire similar work in cities around the world. And like you say, people are moving to cities. There's more people living in cities today than there were people in the world in 1900. So they're an important group for conservation and our relationship to nature. So that's why I'm working with them. Please.
I don't want to make more work for you, but it seems like your ecosystems stop at the shore. And I wondered if you could talk more, since this is, after all, class on oceans,
Yeah.
how much you go into the waters
Yeah.
to talk about those ecosystems.
Yeah, we go a kilometer off the modern shoreline so across the Hudson River and the East River, and capturing Governor's Island and Liberty Island, that sort of thing, in the northern part. And Welikia will be from Sandy Hook across to Jamaica Bay and Queens and all the waters around. So no, we did the marine communities.
Do you do the topography of
Yep, we
the
did.
waterways as well?
The bathymetry was there as well. Yep. We also have a map of the marine substrate. So, where it's sand, where it's oyster shell, where it's silt from the historic maps, which is important for some, species that live on the bottom of the sea. And then the other interesting thing, of course, is that, the waters are very dynamic, right? Especially around New York, they range, 40 degrees in temperature. So you get one fish fauna in the summer that's completely different than the fish fauna in the winter. So I had a project with John Waldman at Queens College where we actually worked out an extension of the methods to make it run seasonally, at least in the water. So, yeah, WCS has we run that in addition to the Bronx Zoo, the New York Aquarium, so marine systems are of great interest to us. We have a global marine program. We actually have a New York Seascape program.
How much of your project is being used by developers, like urban developers at the moment?
Yes, the question is how much is the project being used? Yeah, how much is the project being used by developers? So some. It's a little hard to tell. You put something out in the world and you don't have a way to necessarily track, how it gets used. But I know it's of huge interest to the architectural community. I get talks to architects all the time about this, and they talk to developers, right? And it's not uncommon that I hear sort of post facto that somebody, gave my book as an entree, some green architect trying to get into somebody's office, right? So it's a little bit hard to know, how does an idea shape a culture. We also make all the GIS data available, so you can actually download it. It kind of kills me when I find out somebody's been using the Beely map. I was talking to somebody at Con Ed recently, and they're like, oh yeah, we use the Beely map all the time to find where all the waterways were. And I'm like, don't use the Beely map, use my data. And you can actually download it and put it in your AutoCAD. I'm like, why are you doing that? That makes me upset. The other thing that just not exactly what you asked, but something that really surprised me about this project is how much people in the arts picked it up. So I get these weird, people send me short stories and poems. People, give sermons about Mannahatta. Somebody made a jazz guitar the shape of Mannahatta. Somebody wrote a little quartet. It's crazy. It's good, but it's crazy. And it's completely untrackable as far as I can tell, except in sort of an anecdotal way. Please?
Where is your data available, GIS data?
On the website, welikia.org/downloads. You also see it, I don't know if you know the Oasis website. They have a lot of the data sets available to look at.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question I think that maybe follows up on the question about cities and inspiration. Because I think the thing that struck me most in the presentation were those figures about water usage and waste generation in Manhattan, and it was totally shocking. You walk down the street and see the huge piles of garbage,
Yeah,
and
people
you
love
just
that.
assume that the city is wasteful. But your data seems to suggest actually that the city works quite well in terms of, you said, sort of performance data. It seems to work quite well. And I wonder, in terms of, would the project have more utility if it was, this is what Long Island looked like 400 years ago, this is what it looks like now? I mean, it would be less spectacular, but you seem to suggest that that's an urban, semi-urban environment that works less well. And I wonder if this sort of method should be being applied to suburban spaces.
So the thing about those graphs about the water consumption and the garbage generation is, remember, they're per capita, they're per person. But there are a lot of persons in a city, right? And that leads to this weird bifurcation in the literature about cities. So there are people that write about the environment of cities, and they're all negative. Cities are essentially predators on the landscape, right? Because they're huge consumers of resources, because they are. Because there's a lot of people there. 65,000 people per square mile is a lot of people, right? But if you look on a per capita basis, it's actually lower, right? So that means if more people move to cities, they're actually using less resources. Collectively, we're using less resources. Maybe we're concentrating the use, but it's less resources. So I think it's sort of a weird thing to think about, but I think that's the way it works. That's why you see huge piles of garbage, but each person's actually throwing out less garbage. Because out here, there's many fewer people, but they're throwing out more garbage per person. So, and then the question about where it applies, yeah, it applies anywhere. Again, one person, one effort, one time. If you're gonna start somewhere, I think Manhattan's a good place to start. I live in the Bronx. I'm gonna do the rest of New York City. I would love for you guys to do Long Island. That would be great. And Terra Nova is all about, suburban landscapes and how do we make them more efficient going forward. So I encourage you to check that out too. Thank you. Yep. Okay, yeah.
I want to thank our official class period is over, so if you're in Anderson's class, just make sure you leave your name and number, name tag number on a slip of paper in the back. But we have the room, so if anybody wants to ask another question, please come down and you can choose for a minute.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, don't be shy. Come down and say hello. Thanks everybody for coming. I'll see you Monday. We had folks from several different classes here.